The Fifth Season by N.K Jemisin. This is an award-winning opening to the Broken Earth trilogy, and it is my first full-length N.K Jemisin novel, and I loved it. Let's jump into my spoiler-free review of this book. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As I said, this is my spoiler-free review of N.K Jemisin's The Fifth Season. There will be no spoilers for it in here. It is a book that I actually really enjoyed and I really want to get into discussing with you guys. It has been long awaited on my TBR. I've been putting off the Broken Earth trilogy for far too long, and let's talk about whether this is a book you might enjoy and what I thought was good and what I thought needed work throughout this book. So in the fifth season, we follow three main characters. These are all women. We follow Essen, who is a mother whose son has been murdered and her daughter has been kidnapped, and she is on the hunt for her daughter and her husband and trying to find her daughter and make sure she is okay and exact some sort of justice or revenge on her husband for what he has done. We are also following Demaya, who is a young woman who is being taken to the fulcrum. She's been discovered that she has some form of magical talent. Most people are terrified of that, and she is on her way to the fulcrum to be trained in this and to learn to manage and control her magic. As well as that, we follow Cyanite, who is at the fulcrum, this same training facility. She is already mostly trained and is a relatively well-respected, if somewhat young, practitioner, and she is sent on a mission with a very powerful practitioner of these arts with an ulterior motive as she goes about this world. So they're the three main characters that we follow. Two of those we follow in a pretty limited third-person perspective. One of those we get given in second person, which I know is a little bit weird. I recently read Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which was a novella in second person, and I actually have no problem with second person. I actually really like the way it feels, the way it sounds. I actually found more of a struggle getting into this book because of the present tense, but that did totally work for me. It just took a little bit of getting used to, as it often does when I have a present tense book and present tense prose to follow. The world building here from Jemisin is particularly interesting. It is called the Broken Earth trilogy for a reason, and that is because the Earth is broken. It is messed up and it is really trying to kill people. There is loads of seismic activity, and as well as the normal 4 seasons of the world, every few hundred years there is something called the fifth season, and this is where something goes wrong with the Earth. The Earth has some major change, and generally these seasons can last for a year or maybe decades, and they kill off huge swathes of the human population. Therefore, this population is set up into communities or comms where it is all about how useful are you. Can you provide a use to this comm? If you are useless, if you are not what this comm needs, you will be rejected, you will be ejected from the comm. If you are what is needed, you'll be welcomed in, and you are only worth anything as much as how useful you are to the community that you are a part of. And that is a huge part of this world. It is very bleak, it is very dark, it is very grimdark in terms of a setting, so just be prepared for that when you're going into this. To go along with this broken earth, the practitioners of magic that we see in this world are called origines. They're often referred to as roggers in a derogatory fashion. Origines have the ability to impact and affect the earth on a seismic level. They can do stuff to shift plates, they can quiet shakes, so their earthquakes are often very common in this world, and the origins who are powerful enough have the ability to quell those shakes and to keep things calm, to stop volcanic eruptions, maybe to prevent heavy losses from earthquakes as well as many other things, other ways of interacting with the earth. They can be extremely and exceedingly powerful, but they are not always. Young origins can actually quell shakes subconsciously, even as babies and toddlers, which is a particularly interesting idea to have with this magic set. The general population, or often referred to as stills by the origins, are very frightened and afraid of origins. They are seen as despicable, they are seen as just abominations and highly dangerous, and generally if you are discovered to be one, if you cannot be taken to the fulcrum to be trained quickly, you will often be murdered or at the very least ejected from your community as an outcast. You are seen as absolutely vile and something to be supremely terrified of. So that is the kind of setup we have here for the origins, and every single character we follow, these 3 main characters, they're 3 women of differing ages, but they all are origins. They all have this ability to interact with the earth in this sort of magical way. In lots of ways, the 5th season feels more sci-fi than it does fantasy. The way origins work is never really explained in a sci-fi manner. It definitely is left more as magic. So there's definitely a mix of sci-fi and fantasy going on here with the 5th season. So with that little bit of an introduction out of the way, let me talk to you about what I think Jemisin does really, really well here and the things that maybe don't work as well. So all in all, I really love Jemisin's prose. I love the way she writes, and I love the character study we get here. Some of these characters we follow, we see more than others. I think Cyanite is definitely the one we see most often and we most often follow. And I think that her characterization is really good. She's definitely conflicted. She definitely has this difficult relationship with who she is, with the way the world sees her. As an origin who's been trained by the fulcrum, she is very much a servant, very much a slave to the fulcrum. She does what she is told. She's been trained to be servile and to be quiet and submissive and polite, to not scare the stills, not scare those people who would normally be scared of the origins. And I think that's really interesting, how she has to limit herself and rein herself in, and I think the characterization of her through that is great. I think the characterization of Essen, the mother who is looking for her daughter, is very good. She is definitely repressing lots and lots, and that works. Now that works partially because we know that's the case. So if she feels detached and not very open, there's a good reason for that. That's not poor writing. That's because that is how that character is being portrayed to us, that she is hiding from herself in many ways. And I find that really interesting. I think that's a really interesting character to follow. And I quite liked the second person perspective there, to almost feel detached like Essen is being detached from herself and from her own emotions and her own feelings. And I think that device is used very well to achieve that feeling. So that's done very, very well. I really liked the way that Jemisin handles that. As well as the really interesting character work that Jemisin has, I also really like the way that she handles this idea of the fulcrum and being a second-class citizen, being a slave, essentially, the way that she deals with the character conflict, the emotional turmoil that would provide, the way that they even talk about themselves, that they are referred to as roggers, but that is something that they would definitely not do themselves most of the time. The way some characters will use that as an empowering tool. Some of these origins will use the term rogger about themselves and about their other colleagues and people they know as almost a way of using it as an empowerment. Now, you might be seeing some things there where the themes are really good, but some of the real world analogues are pretty on the nose. They're not subtle. Jemisin clearly has something she wants to say and she's gonna say it. And that's great. I have no real issue with that. But if you're looking for a subtle approach to what's going on in our world and how fantasy can talk about those things, this isn't hugely subtle. It's pretty clear. It's a pretty obvious analogue. But I think it is done pretty well, which is a fine. It doesn't always need to be subtle as long as it's done well. Subtlety and quality are not necessarily the same thing. The other thing that Jemisin does well here is she unveils things slowly and really well. At the start, it feels very much like a normal narrative. As it progresses, you start to pick up things from the different perspectives that are going to enable you to see different things and start to see things that don't quite line up. And you start to think and have questions about exactly what is going on, when are things happening, who's where, when, why, how. And although by the time things get completely revealed as to what's going on, it shouldn't be a massive surprise to you. I do like the way it was revealed in that slow moving fashion. I like that by 50% of the way through the book, I had a reasonable idea of what was going on. By 70%, I was pretty nailed that I knew what was going on with this interesting style of storytelling. And I can definitely see why this is critically acclaimed, because it's done very well. I like that there was clearly enough there to put the pieces together, but it wasn't blindingly obvious. Now, that's always a fine line to tread, and I think it is trodden well here in the 5th season. You're still not sure from the way I'm describing this whether you'll enjoy it or not. I would say this definitely had vibes of The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Now, if you've read The Road and you thought, oh, it was bleak, but it was interesting and you thought it was worth reading and worthwhile and satisfying, which I did, I really liked The Road. I thought it was a great read, but it certainly was bleak. This has a lot of the same kind of vibes, almost a post-apocalyptic setting. There's this sort of very bleak going through a world where people are struggling and they are fighting to survive, and they will do anything it takes to survive. I think that's got very Road-esque vibes. What I will say is this is definitely more fantasy than The Road is. The Road is very much post-apocalyptic, dystopian, maybe a little bit sci-fi, but not really. Here in the 5th season, it's much more sci-fi, much more fantasy, and it is a little bit less bleak in the style of writing, even if the world and the plot are probably pretty much as bleak, if not more bleak, than Cormac McCarthy's The Road. All in all, I blitzed through this pretty quickly. I read it in about 4 or 5 days, which is pretty quick for me. I'm not the fastest reader in the world. And generally, I only have positive things to say about it. There is not much that I would say that is negative about this. I think there are lots of positives. It may not be my favourite novel in the world, but I did really enjoy it. Currently, I have it down as a 4.5-star read. It was definitely worthwhile. The only real negative I can put forward is that the real world analogue and the sort of the ideas that Jemisin is trying to push forward and engage with are not subtle. Like I said, that's not necessarily an indicator of quality though. Sometimes things don't have to be subtle. That's a very minor nitpick. All in all, I really, really love this book. Gave it 4.5 stars. If you are happy with a grimmer, a bleaker read in your fantasy and sci-fi, and you want to engage with some serious themes rather than having a joyful, heroic fantasy, this is definitely a book that you should pick up. Highly recommend the 5th season by N.K Jemisin. I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been informative. Let me know down below if you are interested in picking this one up, if you're going to pick it up, or if you have read it, whether you liked it or not. And if you want to see more of my content, there should be another video of mine up here for you to go and watch now. I'll see you guys again soon.